Okay, we start learning muscles at the muscles of facial expression. So that's a group of muscles that are all involved in moving skin to give you a facial expression. This expression could be smiling, frowning, um, a state of shock, but we communicate with one another using facial expression. Now, what makes these a little different is these skeletal muscles are not moving bones, they're moving skin. So their origins are all on bones, right? Because the origin doesn't move, but they insert into the skin. Okay? So the first one, our first muscle, is called the frontalis. And that should look familiar because the first bone we ever learned was the frontal bone. So this muscle is named after the location. It kind of covers the frontal bone. Its origin is up here. All right, so remember, it doesn't move up there. There's a tendon up here. This white stuff is all flat tendon. We're going to learn it. I think I have it labeled on a separate picture, but it's called the epicranial, because it's on top of the cranium, aponeurosis. And aponeurosis is a flat tendon. So it originates basically on top of your head. It inserts into the skin under your eyebrows. And remember what muscles do. They pull the insertion towards the origin. So if you imagine this muscle contracting and lifting the skin here, it would raise your eyebrows and also it wrinkles your forehead. All right. So again, what we're trying to do is not just memorize and look at the picture, say, okay, that's the name of it. I got to memorize what it does. Analyze it. If we go through those steps, right? And those steps that I talked about in the previous video, you don't have to do every single step, but if you do the majority of those steps, you should be in pretty good shape. So for this one, it belongs to the group facial expression. We should be able to locate it on a picture. Specifically knowing the origin and insertion, you won't be asked, but if you know the insertion is the skin of the eyebrows, you know that it must move that up. All right, so therefore you would then know the action is raising your eyebrows. All right, next one, orbicularis oculi. All right, so what do those words mean? Well, oculi means the eyeball. All right, so oculi is eye. Orbicularis is, you can think of that as either a little circle or a muscle that orbits. Okay, and this one's going to orbit around the eye. So it goes around the eye. Now this one is circular, and when you have a circular muscle and it contracts, it basically squeezes, or it makes that circular muscle smaller. So if this muscle squeezes, it's going to close the eye. All right, so this is done, if you think about going out in bright light and you have to squint, all right, that's squeezing that orbicularis oculi in order to close the eyes. All right, when it relaxes, it helps to open your eye. But you also have to elevate the eyelid. So we're going to learn another muscle is found in the actual eyelid here that will elevate that eyelid. Okay, so to open your eyes, you have to relax the orbicularis oculi and elevate the eyelid. Next one, look at the name. Levator, so it elevates. Labii is lip. Superioris is the upper lip. So notice where this one is. It's above the upper lip. All right, the origin is here. The insertion is down here on the skin of the lip. So when this one contracts, it raises this portion of the upper lip. So it raises your upper lip. There's another one right next to it. So notice there's 3 muscles here. It's actually a 4th here that we have to keep straight. All right. Sometimes there's muscles that are in similar locations. Usually if you're in a similar location, you're doing a similar thing. So you got to figure out what makes it different. All right, the one next to it is called the zygomaticus minor. Zygomaticus should sound familiar. That's its origin. So it originates off of the zygomatic bone, comes down, inserts about the same location as the levator labii superioris. So it, in essence, does a very similar thing. Slightly different, but for us, it also raises, excuse me, raises your upper lip. And then the next one is a little bit bigger. It's over here. That's the zygomaticus major. So major because it's a little bigger. But the more important thing is look where it inserts. It inserts at the corner of the mouth. So it's going to raise not really here, not just the upper lip, but the corner. All right, so it pulls the corner of the mouth over towards that zygomatic bone. So that's the main difference between the minor and the major, is the action's a little bit different. It is named because it's slightly bigger, but to differentiate these two muscles, look at where the insertion is. If it's just at the upper lip, it's the minor. If it's at the corner, it's the major. Zygomaticus, again, meaning they originate off the zygomatic bone. There's another one here. You'll notice this one kind of is lateral. It doesn't really raise. It pulls the corner laterally. It's called the rhizorius, or rhizoris, I should say. And rhizoris is a weird word. It doesn't really have anything to do with the location. It doesn't really apply to a lot of the characteristics. I had to look it up. It actually means laugh or laughing. So you use kind of all these muscles when you smile, like when you think about Professor Kupke and how he teaches you all this A&P that usually puts a big smile on your face, or when you're laughing, you're going to use a lot of these muscles that move the upper and corner of your mouth. All right? All right, there's one in the chin. If you remember, we didn't really talk much about this regional term, but the chin, the regional name in anatomy is mental. So this is the mental region. So this one's named after the chin. And this muscle wrinkles your chin and protrudes your lower lip. So this one you kind of use when you're pouting or you're upset. Kids like to use this one a lot when they're not getting their way. And that lower lip kind of protrudes out. The chin wrinkles a little bit. And that kind of shows that you are, pouting and kind of feel sorry for yourself. And that's kind of the expression that this muscle helps to get across. All right. All right, moving on. We got more. Levator, so it elevates. Palpebri, so we got to know what that word means. It means eyelid. Superioris, so it raises or elevates your upper eyelids. And you do that in order to keep those eyes open. All right. Now, this actually probably is not this muscle. This is probably part of the orbicularis. This muscle's fibers should be running vertically like this. So when they contract, it elevates that eyelid. All right. So this one keeps your eyes open. There's another orbicularis, so another muscle that kind of orbits around something, but this one orbits around your mouth, so it's the orbicularis oris. And when this muscle contracts, again, you have to kind of imagine this circular muscle squeezing on those lips, so it kind of closes your lips, but it protrudes your lips. All right, so think about when you're kissing or when you're whistling. All right, you got to protrude those lips. So that's the orbicularis oris. Next one, same idea. We got a couple muscles in a very similar location. They're named slightly similarly. We want to make sure we know the difference. And the difference is where they insert. The depressor labii inferioris depresses the lower lip. All right, and to depress the lower lip, you got to pull down on it. So the origin is going to be down here, and then it inserts in that lower lip and pulls that lower lip down. There's another one right here, but notice it's going to insert more into the corner, which we call the angle in this case. So the angle of your mouth is basically the corner of your mouth. But it's going to be a depressor anguli, meaning the angle, oris. So it lowers the angle or the corner of your mouth. All right. So again, a lot like the zygomaticus muscles, we want to look where they insert, understand that that's what they're going to move. They're going to pull that insertion down and give you the action. All right. So these two students like to confuse with one another, but you just got to look at where they insert. So where do they move? Platysma. Platy means broad and flat. This is a very thin, kind of flat, wide muscle of the neck. And what this muscle does, it's kind of confusing because you say, well, I thought these were all facial expression. This muscle's not even in the face. But you actually have facial expression using your neck. And the best thing to do is, do this in the mirror. But you have to kind of know, like you kind of want to be shocked or disgusted about something. So if you're disgusted about something, the skin of your neck tenses and it kind of pulls down on kind of this skin here. So it draws the lower lip down and tenses your skin. So when you tense the skin of your neck, that's kind of my wife does it all the time when she's like disgusted with me, right? If I do something disgusting, she kind of gives me that look of disgust and the skin of her neck tenses. All right, so that's the platysma. All right, side view. So this is a lateral view. Now a lot of these muscles we've already done. So all these muscles over here we've already done. This is just a different view. So frontalis, orbicularis oculi, levator labii superioris, the two zygomaticus muscles. We've got the two depressor muscles. You can see a little bit of the mentalis, but I wouldn't worry about it there. This looks like the rhizoris there. I wouldn't quite worry about it there. So we've already done these muscles. This is just a different view. Notice that the frontalis is kind of continuous with a muscle back here called the occipitalis. So that should make a lot of sense because that's where the occipital bone resides. In between the two is that flat tendon, the epicranial aponeurosis. So again, an aponeurosis is a flat tendon. A lot of times tendons are almost like cords, right, where they attach, but this one's flat and broad. So these two muscles kind of work together. Some people consider it kind of all one muscle, the occipitofrontalis, but we're going to just learn it kind of separate. But when this muscle contracts, it pulls, remember those eyebrows up. Well, this muscle is going to kind of retract. It's going to pull that skin of your scalp backwards. So it retracts the scalp. What else can we see? Well, we've got a muscle here, but notice I made it a different color. It's in a different group. This muscle inserts into the mandible. So if you're inserting into the mandible, therefore you're moving the mandible, you're a muscle of mastication. All right, so we're going to learn 4 of those. We'll kind of talk about them a little later. But this muscle is called temporalis because that's where it's located. And the insertion you can't really see. You got to pretend or imagine you can see that insertion underneath this muscle attached to the mandible. All right, so it attaches to the mandible under here. And if the muscle's up here and it's pulling that mandible that direction, it's going to elevate the mandible. But notice part of the muscle's way back here, so it can also retract the mandible. So notice what I'm doing. I'm analyzing the muscle. I'm looking at where the origin is way up here on the temporal bone. So it's going to pull the mandible towards this area. But this area is both above the mandible, so it can elevate, and it's also posterior, so it can move that mandible posteriorly, which we call retracting the mandible. All right, so that's a muscle of mastication. There's another muscle of mastication on this view called the masseter, or masseter. Masseter probably makes a little more sense, but sometimes these muscles are named slightly different, but masseter or masseter. it's going to really just elevate the mandible. It's a really strong muscle. Some suggest it's pound for pound the strongest muscle in the human body. But notice it's running pretty much vertically. So if you're pretty much just running vertically, that's the movement you're going to provide. So this one's going to elevate the mandible when you bite down on something, right? Which, think about that phrase, biting down on something, you're really biting up on it because you're moving the mandible up. All right, but again, that's another muscle of mastication. Sternocleidomastoid I have in a separate color as well because it's not a facial expression muscle. It's not a muscle of mastication. It's actually moving your head. It's in your neck. All right, it's a pretty big muscle of the neck. It's kind of a landmark muscle, meaning it's fairly easy to see in the neck, and we use it to kind of gauge where we are in the neck if you're doing some sort of there's a number of like surgeries that might have to be done, or there's actually an anesthesia that is used to block nerves that you have to know where to inject, and they use that sternocleidomastoid to kind of know where they are in the neck. But it's named after its origins, sternum and clavicle, so those would be kind of down here. It inserts into the mastoid process. Remember, the mastoid is just behind the ear. It's part of the temporal bone. But what it does is it moves that mastoid. All right, and it's kind of hard to do it just in a drawing like this, but what I want you to do is rotate your head to the left. So if you move your head to the left, you're using your right sternocleidomastoid. So you're kind of pulling that mastoid process this way, and this guy will look the other way. So he'll look away from you. All right? So remember, this view is a right side view. This is the right sternocleidomastoid, but it's going to help you look to the left. You're going to rotate your head to the opposite direction. We call that contralateral rotation. So it's a right muscle, right? It's on the right side, this one. You've got one on each side. But it's going to help you rotate your head to the opposite side. Now that's if we only use one of them. We call that unilateral. So unilateral means you're only using one side. So if you only use the right side, it's going to help you rotate to the left. Bilateral means you're going to contract both of them. So if you contract both this one and the one on the other side, on the left, you're going to flex. And flexing your head is when you look down. So when you look down at your desk or your paper, all right, or let's say you're praying before an A&P exam, you're flexing your head and you're using both sides. So that's a bilateral contraction of the sternocleidomastoid muscles. All right. Okay, and then we got another one with a different color. Trapezius. Oops. Trapezius doesn't move your head, it moves your scapula. All right, so this one, you just see a little bit of it in the back of the neck. It's also in the upper part of your back. So we're going to locate this muscle, in any picture there. You can see the back. It's a pretty big muscle. It's trapezoid shaped, so it's named after its shape. This part of it, the part of it that's up in your neck, is going to elevate the scapula, right? To elevate the scapula, you must be above the scapula because you got to lift it up, right? You got to pull it up. So this portion of the trapezius elevates. The part that's in the back is actually going to retract your scapula. So the trapezius, depending on what part of the muscle gets stimulated, it can elevate and retract your scapula. All right, muscles and mastication. Let's do that, and then we'll start a new video. So we already learned two of them. You've got the temporalis, elevates and retracts. You got the masseter, which pretty much just elevates. And then you got two that are deep. So you're not going to see them on this drawing. You got to understand that when you look at a picture, there's things they've done, right? Like here, they've kind of cut a little piece of the muscle out to see the fibers a little better. Sometimes you're going to have to remove muscles. So you would have to remove the masseter to see the two pterygoid muscles. Pterygoid means wing-shaped, and we'll look at that a little better on the next slide. And there's two of them. One's more medial, one's more lateral. But they're going to do kind of all the other stuff that your mandible does, right? So we already learned how to elevate the mandible. We know how to retract the mandible. So what else can you do? You can protract it, so you can move it forward, and then you can move it laterally or side to side. We call that lateral excursion of the mandible. So that's what the two pterygoid muscles do. So there's actually 4 muscles of mastication: temporalis, masseter, and the two pterygoids. Now there's another muscle called the buccinator, all right, or buccinator. I've heard it pronounced differently. Buccal means cheek, all right. So it is actually in your cheeks. So if you pinch your cheeks, there's a muscle in there, all right. It's not a muscle of mastication, all right. So if you're ever asked, this one is not, all right. It doesn't move your mandible, but it is used when you chew food. It just keeps the food in between your teeth. So to do that, you got to compress your cheeks. All right, you do that when you're chewing food or eating, or let's say you're chewing gum. Well, you got to keep that gum in between your teeth. So your cheeks will actually compress. You use it when you whistle. All right, so whistling requires you to protrude your lips, right, with the orbicularis oris, and compress your cheeks. And then babies use it when they're breastfeeding in order to suckle. You can see their little cheeks compress in when they're breastfeeding. So again, it's named after the cheeks, not a muscle of mastication. You use it when you whistle, when you eat, and back in the day, if you breastfed or even fed from a bottle, you used it to suckle. All right, so those are the muscles of mastication. This picture shows you the pterygoids. So notice in this picture, they cut bone away. They removed a lot of the muscles, like the masseter is gone, in order to show deeper muscles. And these are the two pterygoids. This one is more medial. This one's more lateral, but they do the protraction and lateral excursion. All right, so we'll end this that video here. We'll pick up on the tongue on the next video, and we'll keep going.